Are we recording?
Yes, we could record, but yeah.
What about holding on to, or do you want to record now or wait till Morna turns off?
I'm recording now.
Okay.
So let's go then, Camilla.
Well, you're waiting for me. No, I thought you were doing. You explain the situation, Chris, because I.
Okay, everybody, welcome to Radical Anthropology. This evening we have a rather unusual anthropologist who's done, in my view, absolutely amazing work. And when I say unusual, it's because nobody knows a lot about her. Very few people know much about her, and she hasn't done a huge amount to get her extraordinary work published. So it's Morna Finnegan, we're going to be, Camilla and I are going to be introducing her for a little bit longer than we usually introduce the speaker, and that's because she teaches in Edinburgh, and her timetable was changed, and so she's got a clash, and she'll be here with us quite soon. She absolutely promises pronto, 7 p.m. she'll be making her appearance. So what I thought we would do is Camilla and I would sort of introduce Morna Finnegan, if that's all right with all of you. So, Camilla.
Okay. Right, slightly sprung on me because Chris did tell me, but I then forgot. So, yeah, Morna's been an amazing thinker on gender in relation particularly to egalitarianism and hunter-gatherer women's culture. And she's been a great colleague for me as well in co-editing a book with me on human origins, contributions from social anthropology, which was a real pleasure to do that with her and with Hilary Callan as well. And if anybody's interested in that book, we are doing a book club that's running on Fridays. It's actually on the same Zoom ID as this one. It's Fridays at 5 o'clock. And we're reading through, so that's the book as Chris is showing. We're reading through the chapters. This coming Friday, we're reading chapter 4, the classic by Shirley Ardner. And the following Friday, we'll read Morna's chapter in that book on the elephant in the room and sex and hunter-gatherer egalitarianism. So yeah, what can I, so many kind of wonderful concepts that Morna's produced. And I think Chris has actually got some stuff prepared to help us here, but let me just mention a little bit. The idea of gender as something that really comes out of collectivity, of women's collectivity particularly, that gender is something that is antagonistic to privatization, that women, particularly amongst egalitarian hunter-gatherer women of the forest, really resist any form of privatization, including privatization of the body. And this is underlying their experience of their bodies, the expression of their bodies, and underlying their power, their manifest power in a very egalitarian system. So gender really has a plurality, as well as it's kind of a sort of bodily aspect, but as well as a cultural aspect. With that, what she calls the politics of eros, this use of bodies, limbs, touch, song, voice, to, as she said, it just disrupts any notion of hierarchy by the women's song, which is just completely challenging to any idea of a male dominant hierarchy, by contesting, the vaginas win, cunts win, penises are useless, they just produce wee-wee. She's just showing women's kind of militant dance formations, their capacity of, on the one hand, being incredibly seductive and beautiful, but on the other hand, being militant and challenging. So kind of that combination of the two things. So this description of gender in her key article, Politics of Eros, is very exciting. And further to that, Morna's idea of the need of how power is distributed in these egalitarian systems, that it's never held or monopolized, it's always circulating and always moving, and that egalitarianism is vitally depends on that movement of power. It never stays fixed and then enables anyone to gain monopoly or accumulation. Something which she's dubbed, well, pendulum of power or communism in motion is another of the, I think Chris might read some of the quotes from Morna's PhD on that one. And a recent work that Morna's done has focused on, and I think she's going to speak about it today, focused on what she's called corporeal morality, that it's a morality that's really rooted viscerally in bodies, and the feelings bodies have, feelings about each other, which is so contact rather than as an opposition to something like control, command and control, contact and kind of conviviality, living together and feeling together as the basis, the absolute basis of morality. So she relates this to a whole set of kind of African hunter-gatherer concepts of shared power, and that power it's necessarily shared, and it's something that's experienced very viscerally through that sharing, and that it's never going to, again, it's never going to belong just to a particular person, but it's always going to be experienced by many people, and there's no kind of zero sum in that power. It's something that can only kind of be embodied, be more powerful the more bodies. Chris, do you want to rescue me with a few quotes to go on with? I can't.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
I'm sorry. You should have reminded me a little on that.
So, okay. So this is the cover of issue number 3 of Radical Anthropology, and it has the wonderful article Eros and Women's Power by Morna. But what I'm going to do until Morna arrives in 20 minutes is read out brief sections from her unpublished PhD. So her PhD is called The Political is Personal, Eros, Ritual Dialogue and the Speaking Body in Central African Hunter-Gatherer Society. So already we have in that title the idea that women's power in an egalitarian society, it doesn't come from talk, it doesn't come from the head, it comes from the body itself which speaks, and that body, that female body, is erotic and collective, and all the more powerful for being those two things. So Morna did her fieldwork, brief as it was, for reasons of getting pregnant. I think it's about 2003, and she did her fieldwork with Jerome Lewis's support and supervision, and also the supervision of Alan Barnard, more formally from Edinburgh University. But she was working with the same people that Jerome Lewis worked with, the Benjeli Yaka at a place called Mbuli in the Republic of Congo. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to read out short snippets from the PhD. And just to start with this one, the central premise of the thesis is that it is through the sensual, somatic conversation between male and female ritual collectives that the political pendulum at the heart of community life is animated. So that's one way of putting what Camilla just mentioned there. Morna's a brilliant formulation that with egalitarian hunter-gatherers, you don't really have matriarchy, but you don't have patriarchy. You have what she calls communism in motion, and that's a pendulum between a kind of playful matriarchy, where women seize power joyfully, collectively, cheekily, I mean, really, you know, with enormous amount of raucous kind of adult humor directed at the opposite sex. And then after a few days of women's really, you know, raucous rule over the entire camp, the women, as it were, get a bit tired of being on top and more or less think, well, okay, that was fun. We kind of taught the men a playful lesson. Let's surrender power. And after a while, maybe a week or two, the men answer back with their own ritual. So the women's ritual is called Ngoku, and that's a temporary period of women's rule or matriarchy. And then when the men answer back, they do that with a dengi, and that's a patriarchy, but it's a playful patriarchy. And what it means is that you have a kind of revolution, a turning of the world upside down, but instead of just women doing it, okay, we've turned the world upside down, and now we've got matriarchy. It's more powerful and actually more sustainable to win the revolution, if you like, and then surrender power in order to let the men have their go, but don't let the men outstay their welcome. And precisely because the male Ijengi could potentially become patriarchy, could potentially become male power going too far, it actually acts to stimulate a new women's revolution. And so you have this, what Morna calls this pendulum of power, or communism in motion. Women rule, then after a while men rule, then women rule, then men rule. And it looks as if from the mythology of these alternations of power, that the clock is not a night-day clock. It doesn't all happen in one day, and it certainly doesn't happen during the course of a year. It's much more closely a once a month oscillation or pendulum, although not necessarily these days strictly monthly, but it's close to a monthly pendulum of power. So, do we want to sort of explore that, discuss it? Anyone got any questions? Because I have a feeling it might slightly kill things if I just read through all these different quotations, but I've got some very juicy ones, some really nice ones coming up. Does anyone want to comment on that?
Can you say something about Bakhtin? Or I would say something about Bakhtin, if you like. Well, do people know who is Bakhtin?
So Mikhail Bakhtin is the marvelous Soviet, immediately post-war Soviet theoretician of carnival. How on earth Mikhail Bakhtin managed to keep a sense of humor under Joseph Stalin when so many of Bakhtin's own friends had suffered rather grisly fates, one only has to guess. But Mikhail Bakhtin, with his major book on Rabelais, described how in the Middle Ages in Europe, once a year, there would be a carnival, a carnival of the oppressed, turn the world upside down, a Saturnalian turning of everything upside down. And Morna makes a lot of that, because what happens in carnival is that the lower bodily stratum, the lower parts of the body have their voice. So it's grotesque humor, but it's bodily humor. And what Morna's doing is suggesting that this kind of once a year Saturnalian carnival, turning the world upside down, righting all the wrongs, but only for a brief period, has its origins in something much older, because African hunter-gatherers have a kind of carnival to turn the world upside down, led by women, on a once a month basis. So, Camilla, you're using your phone. Yeah.
Yes, sorry, because Ingrid was trying to get in.
Oh, right.
They're trying to get in, so they'd be able to come and help. Ingrid and Jerome, maybe.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And you've just given them
I haven't seen them trying, but anyway, yeah. So the reason for talking about Bakhtin is, yeah, as you said, the question of sort of turning the world upside down, but it isn't. It's about the lower bodily stratum, yeah. As Bakhtin identified this part of the body as vocal, the body as dialogic, and as kind of talking back and able to give speech. And I had a particular, oh, I'm trying to find it now, and I've lost it off my desktop. We ran a session in Oxford. Let me say something about this on laughter, bodies, and the evolution of morality. And I expect that Morna will talk a bit about this tonight, where we were asking the question of whether morality itself evolved through these Bakhtinian cultures of laughter, which were expressed through the lower bodily stratum, as it were, the female bodies particularly. And that perhaps as antithetical to that, what was seen as the kind of very prudish morality of much more hierarchical societies was actually a sort of anti-morality from the point of view of an egalitarian society, because it was a result of and an attempt to justify the failure to share properly. So what this women's cultivated sort of bodily laughter as the source of morality is an insistence, as I say, against any type of privatization. It's an insistence on sharing. So Bakhtin had this idea of cultures of laughter, where the drama of bodily life privileges sex, growth, birth, blood, eating, and defecation. And we were considering then, what would the role of this material bodily principle have played in the evolutionary emergence of morality? So just to give some context to this, in terms of the evolution of morality, we heard something about it from Brian Hare earlier this term, and the ideas of self-domestication going with that, and ideas that he worked alongside Richard Wrangham in developing. And those ideas were really about, if somebody's a dominant male, well, what happens is the other males gang up on that person and do him in, execute him, literally, if somebody tries to be a dominant male. That's kind of the way that morality begins. Or another model is that morality emerges out of warfare. How do you create an in-group morality? So it's a very different perspective to argue, well, no, actually, an original morality, maybe it comes out of this this identity of this collectively gendered body, such as a laughing female collective. And above all, to create anything as sacred, if the body isn't sacred, well, then nothing is. So how does, this is really Morna's question, how is morality seeded into the body from the beginning, from being born, from as an infant who begins to experience shared contact valued by adults? So how does that get kind of seeded into human bodies? How is this then inculcated subsequently as children grow up with corporeal metaphors and practices? And Morna attends to concepts like ekila. We'll hear from Ingrid and Jerome on ekila, mwajo epeme, ngom for the khoisat for Jean-Paul Bushman. So that these are all concepts which are, they kind of get engendered through community dancing. Epeme, ngom, ekila is the dances, ejengi or ngoku would be the dances. These community dances of the egalitarian hunter-gatherers reinforce collective bodies through which the moral necessity, that morality is sharing power. It's not just food, which is shared, but power, which is shared. So this communal labor of distributing social power is done by speaking bodies in a Bakhtinian ritual dialogue with kinetic interchange of bodily fluids and sexual energies. So it's this idea of flowing all the time, actual kind of real sort of bodily fluids and energies flowing all the time.
So one of the...
Hello?
Yeah.
Did you hear me?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Sorry, I was going to come in with another quote, but sorry.
Oh, well, just a minute. So typically, African hunter-gatherers will resist shrinkage to private, isolated, narrowly individual kind of experience through ritual cultures which involve laughing, ribaldry, and provoke sexual opposition. So in much more hierarchical cultures, what may be obscured by a moral veil, which is protective particularly of male dominance and dignity, is then let loose very resoundingly by female collective and polyphonic signals of very bawdy resistance. So it's a real dichotomy of this female laughter with the sort of the dignity of a male hierarchical type of morality. And we were, considering, is it possible the moral values of that hierarchical world, when it fails to laugh, or it fails to allow women to laugh at it, is in fact a kind of anti-morality which is justifying failure to properly share? That was, I think that's one of the sort of big question underlying difference between egalitarian and hierarchical systems.
So what I wanted to do, now that we've got Ingrid and Jerome here, was just say to those who've arrived recently that Morna's turning up in 10 minutes, and that her teaching schedule was changed at Edinburgh, and so she wasn't able to make 6:30, but she'll be here soon. And what we're doing is we're filling the time really, but also hopefully it will be helpful by introducing some of Morna's ideas before she starts to speak to us. So I'm not sure, Ingrid or Jerome, do you want to say a bit introducing Morna? Or is it a bit sudden for me to sort of suddenly thrust that on you? Because I've got plenty of quotations, little passages from Morna's thesis prepared, which I could read out, and then we could talk about those, if that makes it easier.
Why don't you read out what you've prepared, and then we'll see where it goes from there.
Okay, well, it's not that I've prepared them, they're just little selections from the thesis. From chapter 1 of Morna's thesis, the introduction, and she says, biology is culture for the Mengele and for other forest hunter-gatherers scattered across the Congo Basin. This is the first and most general proposal of this thesis. The perennial social eddying that occurs between procreation and hunting, sex and meat, and humans and spirits forms the structure of community life, a complex and subtle political landscape crisscrossed by threads of loyalty and resistance, by the diffusive tug of the sensual against the snap of procreative sex. Different kinds of bodily affinity and agency are involved at every point. Ritual, large communal ritual performance is the point at which the fluency and imaginative potential of bodies is explored. Through such ritual commentary, the relationship between husbands and wives is potentially destabilized. The coalitionary solidarity between groups of mothers, sisters, and daughters is given precedence by particular ways of coordinating the common body and its lyrical voice. It is through the weave, dance, or dialectic between these different possible positions, iteratively occupied and surrendered by people, that we begin to see a complete tapestry. At the core of this tapestry are children and those capacities or actions which bring them to fruition, most particularly female procreative power, inseparable from male hunting power, and male observance of rules and restrictions surrounding menstrual blood and childbirth, inseparable from female ritual hunting power. The result is a society perennially in motion, everything animate and designed to animate. And just to say, philosophically, Morna's whole work is designed to completely transcend and really get rid of the unpleasant, in my view at any rate, results of the so-called cognitive revolution in the sciences, which happened after the Second World War. This idea that language is in the head, and that somehow the head is necessarily in charge of and superior to the body. And of course, a reflection of that is the way in which anthropology is taught, where you have cultural anthropology and you have biological anthropology. The cultural anthropology supposedly to do with sort of ideas and constructs and language, and biological anthropology separated out as body. And Morna's whole emphasis is to say that it's just so damaging and so false, really, to the reality of any society which is free, in the sense that the Mengele very largely are free on so many different levels. So that's what she's saying here. So that's her idea of communism motion, this pendulum of power alternating between the two sexes, and each sex speaks through the body. The men through their legs, their stamping, their muscles, and the women through their erotic bodies. But of course, the eroticism is is not just for men to sort of take. The eroticism is there for the men deserve it, but also very emphatically that the women are being as erotic and sexy as they kind of possibly can. But basically the message is to men: if you want all this joy, you better do some, better do help with the childcare. You better bring some provisions and especially perhaps bring some meat. So the idea of articulate bodies is a way of summing up Morna's work. And of course, I just mentioned Jerome and Ingrid. Of course, Morna's very, very open about the fact that her thesis is mostly based on Jerome and Ingrid's work, because Morna herself was there for such a short time. But having said that, Morna's reading of the surrounding literature on other hunter-gatherers and her way of adopting a gendered kind of feminist perspective. I say kind of because Morna's feminism has very little to do with many usual forms of academic feminism, but Morna's gendered perspective is really, in my view, absolutely remarkable. And I really get quite annoyed with Morna for not getting a beautiful thesis, which is beautifully written as it is, published as a book, because we all need to be able to read it. Right, what does I don't know, anyone else? I could easily read another sentence out or two, but
why not? Unless Jerome or Ingrid would have a little bit to say. I don't know if they want to.
Okay, so Morna says here, when I first began work on this project 5 years ago, she's writing her PhD, I think it was published in 2008. She said, when I first began work on this project 5 years ago, my theoretical inclination was towards social structure. What has become apparent is that the kind of structure I imagined, static, arrested, couldn't possibly work in communities for whom fluidity means everything. So in a way, she was looking for maybe the various concepts people have in anthropology, maybe, a matrilineal, matrilocal society with that particular structure. She was expecting to find what kinship theory is called structure, or structural anthropologists call structure. And she just realized that sort of idea that you have a structure, as opposed to something much more fluid than the word structure captures, it was the main sort of mistake she made in visualizing what she would find during her stay with the jelly. And then wonderfully, the next paragraph here, and this relates to some of the work I've been doing in responding to the death of David Graeber. Morna says here, hunter-gatherers do not lack society, they do not lack politics, they do not lack complex structure. What they lack is the structural violence that would pin these things down, erect fences around them, and render them visible to the abstract eye. I mean, well said, Morna, because so many people think of hunter-gatherers as sort of simple folk without a lot of politics. And the point being made here, made by Jerome, of course, and Ingrid, made by Christopher Byrne, I make the same point, and Camilla as well, of course, is that there's nothing more complex. Given that we come from a primate background, but we're basically great apes, there's no more challenging, complex political project than to maintain an egalitarian social system. It's the most complex thing you can do. The simple thing is to let dominance rear its ugly head, because great apes mostly work on the basis of dominance, and usually it's male dominance, not always, of course, as we know from bonobos. And then just one more, perhaps, and then I'll stop. Organized male violence shows its face in all human communities. The question we must ask is why, among Central African hunter-gatherers, this has never gathered sufficient momentum to harden into a systematic assault on women's autonomy and fertility. Why do incidents of violence remain sporadic and non-permanent? So it seems as if the sort of what we call patriarchy or male dominance, which so many feminists think is universal, emerged as the result of the fixing of one of those poles of that seesaw, one of the ends of the seesaw, between originally a playful movement between women's rule and men's rule, maybe Ngoku and Ejengi. And what happened is, in the course of history or evolution, social evolution, was that the sort of Ejengi pole of things, the male dominant pole of things, which should have been playful and was playful, got stuck, as a result of which the gender of power became open only to persons with a male biology, instead of being, as it was, available to either sex. Yeah. Now, with any luck, I pray this all works out well. With any luck, in a minute, Morna's going to join us, but which would be great. But Jerome, just say a few words before Morna arrives.
Okay, I mean, one thing that probably Morna won't talk about, but which is something that I'm thinking about a lot more in relation to this particular cultural performances, the Ngoku and Ejengi, is the way that they bring participants back to a sort of primordial beginning time. And this has quite extraordinary parallels with what the San trance dance does, in that it brings the participants back to a sort of what they call first creation. And the point of the dance is to bring the sort of vitality, inspiration, the transformative potential of this first creation, this time when forms weren't fixed, when people weren't necessarily, well, they would not be individual people, they would be therianthropes, combinations of animals' hooves, heads, people's bodies, and various unusual combinations. And it was in that process of not being able to name things, where things were constantly reforming and recreating, that the force and power of the San trance dance emerges into what they call the second creation, or the great turning, when the sun arrived and names got fixed on things and they became objects. And this also has parallels with, you know, a lot of Aboriginal ritual in Australia, where people enter a dream time, a moment of the forming of the things that we take for granted as being part of our environment and our sociality. And this is very much what's happening in Ejengi and Ngoku, is that people are returning to the original gender groups that were in existence at the time before contemporary society as we know it today existed. And so you have in these ritual moments a tremendous creative energy which participants are drawing on in order to infuse contemporary society with those original values, with those original understandings and agreements between the gender groups, between the gender groups and the spirits of the landscape. And it's quite remarkable, I think, that you know, this process of using ritual dance and music as a means to access these alternative spaces, these hypothetical everywhens, these creative moments of the beginnings of things, is constantly referred to and of great value to these communities, and something which, you know, obviously in most of these patriarchal societies, people don't engage with the same sort of enthusiasm and energy that we see in these hunter-gatherers. And it's just something that I think is an interesting contemplation, and looking at how similar those practices are, yet how different the manifestations, the structural manifestations of them are. The San trance dance, where women form the musical accompaniment that drives men to these very powerful states, or the way that women's singing and dancing cooks Ejengi so that he becomes more and more excited till he brings his full energy into the community to transform and heal from the rupture of death and very serious social breakdowns. And so anyway, it was just a little reflection to think about that these ritual structures have extraordinary parallels despite their surface differences, and it's anyway something that is an interesting context, I think, for listening to what Morna's got to say and thinking about how this pendulum of power shifts and moves through society, and indeed that this may be a very old tradition that we still see these remnants from, but something that we might do well to think about harder in relation to our current situation, where we are, you know, in this sort of nihilistic, suicidal dive of auto-consuming, which capitalism and patriarchy is currently driving us towards. how can we re-access those very creative forces that our hunter-gatherer colleagues are so adept at engaging with? How can we reconnect with that? It's something which remains a puzzle. I don't have solutions, and certainly in this group there are people I know who experiment with various ways of doing that, and perhaps I should just advertise one of them, which we're currently doing, which is to sing to trees. It's at no moon. To sing to emphasize our shared connection to trees, a very special part of this world, and something which I'd strongly encourage all of you, and maybe Camilla can give you the exact times when no moon is occurring, but something which as a way for us to start to begin to explore experientially what it means to start to get down into that first creation, that source of incredible creative energy that can transform society, that can transform relationships, and see if we can build up enough of it to transform the current situation that really is in dire need of radical transformation.
Wow.
Morna's here.
Morna's here now. Morna, can you hear me?
Unmute.
Have we accidentally muted you? Morna, can you hear me?
Yes, yeah, no, I can hear you, Chris.
Great.
Any chance we can see you?
Yes, I'm just starting my video.
Fantastic.
Okay, so I know you've had to switch quickly from a previous teaching session, but are you ready to go, or do you want a little bit more time? Morna, we've all been saying a few, I think, mostly good things about you.
We've given you a great warm-up act. We've been trying to hold it.
I've been reading out paragraphs from your PhD, 3 or 4 lovely paragraphs, but I hadn't quite got to the one where you talk about my understanding of what it is a mother will do to protect a child could never have come without the difficulty of protecting my own. And you talk about the extraordinary ferocity with which the Benzeli women will defend their own and one another's kids. But I hadn't quite got there, so over to you, Morna.
Okay, thanks, Chris. One of the things that I might need to do, because I'm not, I don't have a second screen here, and I have a few notes that I'd like to kind of refer to, just so that I don't lose the thread. Yeah. So I might minimize, I will probably minimize the Zoom page just for a moment. I don't think you'll lose me anyway. You know, you'll still see me.
You don't want to do PowerPoint or anything, do you? You're not doing that. Yeah.
No PowerPoint. I'm allergic to PowerPoint.
Yeah, that's great. Fantastic.
I've just been doing an hour of it, so.
That's great. Fantastic.
So I'll see if that's going to, I'll just see if that's going to work. Hopefully it will. Me and technology aren't always great friends. Are you seeing my notes, Chris?
I'm seeing you, which is all I want to see, really. I don't want to see your notes particularly.
No, that's good. I'm glad. I didn't want you to see my notes. So I really just want to be able to use that so that I don't, go way off on a tangent, which I'm liable to do after an hour of talking about Durkheim. So I had said, you asked me for a subject for the talk, and the first thing that came to mind was this idea of touch and the theme of being touched, and the ways that people, cultures based on the principle of touch. And I said in the abstract that theories of power and value are always just that. They're theories, they're frameworks that let us share empirical patterns and connections, but that real power and real value is always first in the body. It's located in the body. And how you carry these valuable terms, things like nom, je toi nom, or Aquila, as Jerome describes it, where it's so earthy and tangible, into theory, into communicable frameworks without losing everything but the husk. And so I kind of am continuing thinking that I've been doing for a while on what I call corporeal morality. So, you know, the idea that we're offered insight into systems of power and value by societies where power is never detached from the collective body. You know, it never becomes privatized. Okay, so I wanted to start by thinking about the fact that, you know, in moments of crisis, moments of extremis, people come together and you touch one another. So, you know, you put a hand on a bereaved person's arm, or you kiss a forehead or a cheek. You know, if you're comforting kids, the first thing you do is you put your arms around them. You press your palm against somebody's spine, or you put your chin on somebody's shoulder. You breathe in their skin and their hair, and so much is happening on a chemical level. That whole complex kind of topography of the hug. And the fact that, you know, so many of us recently have either lost that connection, that ability to actually physically, viscerally touch another person. And the fact that in this moment of crisis, and a moment where there was this big kind of global stagger, people were being instructed not to touch. And I thought recently about, you know, all the people who died in care homes during lockdown, who were completely without contact, who were not allowed to be touched. And an Irish writer I really like called Kevin Toulis, who writes about death and the wake process in Irish society. And the fact that, you know, it's really at the heart of what makes us human, that we come around someone at that moment of exit and hold them in all kinds of ways, whether physically or, you know, ritually, communally. And so I was thinking about that response that we made as a society, much of it based on fear, and how it sat with the anthropology of hunter-gatherers. You were talking just now, Chris, about this fact that women have such a powerful presence in their communities among the Benjele or the Mbuti or the Baka or the F peoples, that the fact that you have this collective female body that keeps everything very kind of tangible and literally fuses people together. And I want to come to a beautiful description of Jerome's about women sitting together and singing. And so I started to think that this existential conviction that there was, and that I've seen recently, of illness or health as individual. You know, so my illness, my health, like as in my house, my car, my career, my children, individual contagiousness or individual safety. And, you know, I saw some amazing stuff happen. People making a big effort, despite all the restrictions, to connect in different ways. But I also saw people recoil from one another, quite literally. You know, friends of my children, good friends who suddenly wouldn't touch them, you know, and children full of fear about touch and what would happen if they were to touch another person. And so everyone lost in their own mortality and this terror, you know, that they would catch something. And my good friend Tony in Derry, when he raised objections, which he did, was told again and again, you know, but Tony, people are dying. And he always said the same thing. He said, well, are you not going to die? He said, don't get lost in this fear It's not about being reckless or irresponsible, because of course adhering to all the measures were also about, being respectful of others, taking care of others. But there's such a fine line there in the belief that our illness or our health was up to us. It was individual, and we would either live or die, for ourselves. And Tony said, it's more really about how you live. It's about how you are able to connect, and about how you're able to find ways to touch or hold in moments of crisis. So that's a long-winded way of getting to something that happened when I was at Mbula in Congo. And living next door to this family where there were 2 small babies. And I don't know if I've spoken about this, Chris, but I'd just been there a few weeks when one day, after these 2 3-month-old twin girls had a very fractious night, I noticed everybody wearing the same arc of red paste over their forehead. And the baby's mother, Mgonya, had painted her own face with a crescent of white dots, and she was also wearing this arc over her head. And as the morning went on, she sat outside her door with an aloe mother, and each of them cradled a baby as a stream of people passed. And Mgonya had a big vat of red paste. And I have lots of photos of what she was doing. So she was putting her hand in this paste, this thick red stuff, and she would draw with her thumb an arc on the brow of everybody going past, from toddlers to old women. And her wee girls were wearing this paint as well. And Mongolic paste, I think, is used in a variety of contexts to signal danger, either to the person or from them. So moments of birth, bereavement, initiation, illness. And so different things happened through the day. A group of women came and sat with the babies and the mum, and they sang this very kind of slow, unusually slow and ponderous song. And then a man and woman I didn't recognize came down from the farthest part of the camp, and they stopped in front of the babies, almost kind of formally, a few yards away, and they started to speak directly to these babies, like reasoning with them, remonstrating, delivering a kind of this long speech to the babies, and they took turns to speak. And looking for a way to register concern without intruding or without making things worse. I remembered I had these tiny little bracelets I bought in the marketplace before we came up to Mbula, and I separated them out into 2 sets and just held them in my palm for a moment. And then I offered them to Mgonya, and she took them. And later again, I saw a boy of 9 or 10 walking past with one of the girls in a sling against his chest, and he was crooning and kind of jiggling her. Everybody now, apart from us, wearing this red arc over their brow. And later still in Goku, I heard the women singing away out in the forest, and then they charged through camp. They suddenly just arrived in camp en masse and charged up and down the main thoroughfare, clapping and shouting and lashing out at people, before they stopped again in front of Mgonya and the babies, and they sang for a while before it all petered out. So what it felt like is as though there was this kind of rope being woven from these girls to all the other bodies in camp. As though those who were better able for it, those who were stronger, were actually sharing the sickness. And the community itself was holding on to these babies, using this ritual statement and the red, you know, among all the other things it signifies, is almost like a statement of shared blood, shared essence. And so I kind of, over the last year, I've been reflecting on that fact, you know, that illness wasn't a private or an individual affliction. It was a community problem, and you didn't have to carry it alone. Just as, you know, in Benjele society or F society or Juntois society, traditionally, you didn't have to carry your personhood alone, your identity alone. You know, everything that people had to carry through life was shared. It's not just meat, it's not just dancing and singing and all the good stuff. When there was a moment of need, people also shared illness. They took the illness and carried it together. And so it speaks to a whole different understanding of what the body is, and of our place in a collective body. And so what this has to do with the anthropology of power really is that at Mbule and places like it, we find society premised on the principle of the sensuous. So the principle of touch, the protection and the connection of the young or the vulnerable within this really tactile community body. And that's where you find mothers publicly and culturally vocal, and really fused to such an extent that they're shaping the possibilities available to everyone. And also this is where you see the techniques used to keep people touching, to keep touch open. And I'm not just talking about physical touch, but also the precursor to any really kind of sophisticated social community is the ability to be touched, to, you know, to be affected by the pain of others or the illness of others, what we call empathy. And touch here is really another word for empathy or connection, but to me it's less abstract. It's more fleshy and warm and immediate, you know, and there's something of a challenge as well in touch, and our capacity to do that. Okay, so I want to look at a few of the ways that community premised on that notion of a shared body expands out. And I don't want to talk for a really long time because I know people were waiting around, and there'll be questions, but I want to take this idea of touch and sharing the body and sharing personhood almost as a kind of political thing, and start by looking at the very early work of Richard Katz. I'm not going to go into his research, but I want to look at his findings about what was happening when Juntois healers were going into this trance-like state, Aya. Probably I'm not pronouncing that right. Camilla will know the right pronunciation. During big community dances, where Nom, this energy or heat that rose out of the bodies of healers, was then shared with everybody present as a kind of medicine and also as a protector of well-being. So rifts in the community or conflicts between individuals were addressed during the healing dance. And if you listen to Katz's description, Nom expands, he says, as it boils in the stomachs of individual healers, who then distribute it throughout the dance circle, and using hands-on healing, they touch one another. And boiling Nom, he says, is likened to the sparks that break out into the night in all directions when the burning coals in a fire are stirred with a stick. So Juntoisi healers, very similar to Central African healers that I've read of, or healing ceremonies and rituals, are kind of working on behalf of the community to lure sickness in various forms out of the social body and out of individuals. And Katz says that a major part of that process is the ability to see properly. And when you read his ethnography and the way he writes about Nom, and especially in his later work with Beasley and St. Denis, you get this understanding of the body, almost the whole body, as an instrument for seeing. I don't know if you're familiar with Weber's lovely description of the body as a complete instrument. So when people are working in these healing dances to generate Nom, you see the body as a complete instrument. The whole body is working as an eye almost to see what needs to be healed in the community. And here's a description from a healer himself talking about Nom. He says, you dance, dance, dance. Then Nom lifts you up in your belly and lifts you up in your back, and you start to shiver. Nom makes you tremble. It's hot. Your eyes are open, but you don't look around because you see everything. So the idioms surrounding the healing dance are visceral. Heat building and expanding in the stomach and the spine, vibrating the arms and hands, sometimes exiting the top of the head. And healers, as they're drawing sickness out of the bodies of others, experience this intense abdominal pain that they externalize through loud moaning or wailing. So the voice, we have the voice coming in here as well. And I've talked before about how it's interesting, given the parallels with the process of labor, intense abdominal pain, back pain, heat, uncontrollable trembling, expelling pain through crying out. It's interesting that Juntois women curb their Nom during their reproductive years because they're already known to be full of heat. They're full of Nom, they're full of power. And so they better not dance because, it would explode. And so the motion of Nom in the body is believed to endanger the health of babies, actually, because the idea is that both Nom and children materialize out of this activated body power. Okay, so, going back to the idea of how you take individual physicality, the individual person, and put them into the plural person. How Michael Jackson says, the anthropologist, Michael Jackson says, how do we bridge the gap from I to we? How is that actually done in practice? And he says that for the Kuranku people that he worked with, it's really about moving constantly together. So moving a lot and keeping everything moving, very like the Benjeli, for example, where everything is constantly circulating, but also in synchrony. So using your voice, using your body, synchronistically moving together. And that idea of the we replacing the I becomes very important, and actually becomes a kind of it becomes a principle that sits at the heart of the social economy, the belief in a shared body, and the power of keeping things open. And Jackson says we're embodied social beings before we're anything else. Okay, so I had this description from Jerome, and I know that he's here tonight because I saw his passport photograph among some others when I came on. He gives this beautiful description of Benjele women. And I remember when I was first reading Jerome's thesis way back a long time ago, being struck by this description, because you can feel the event itself, and you can also feel the way that he was feeling it. So he says, Benjele women were lying across each other, legs resting on each other, shoulders touching, arms lying in their neighbour's lap, melting into one another physically and acoustically. And certain women may begin to sing antiphonal duets in nasal voices like seal barks, making reference to their hunger or others' hunger, since this event, this ritual Malobe, opens the camp for meat. They might even go into trance and begin mystical conversations with the moon, women's other husband. And that's really sums up perfectly one of the first things that I noticed after arriving to Mbula, was this fact that it would be very hard to separate women out into individual people because they moved so consistently in that way, you know, woven through one another, whether they were singing and dancing or just sitting around outside their doors preparing food. And the fact that in these performances, in these, the description that I gave, that I quoted from Jerome of Malobe, in these moments, from the smallest kind of most spontaneous eruptions of ritual dance or ritual songs to the biggest kind of big Iboka celebrations, you know, might go on for days at a time. The parallel with descriptions of Juntois healing dances is that nothing is individually owned. So you can't claim this power for yourself. You know, even the fact that a lot of the spirits and the individual dances will come through dreams, through the individual dreams of someone, don't allow them to be claimed. They're never the preserve of any one individual. And if you're familiar with Jerome's writing on Masana, you see that constant negotiation between two possibilities. One is, you know, the individual expression and the fact that people are always strategizing and kind of, you know, doing what they can to express themselves. And then the community constantly kind of expanding back. And there's always this a kind of back and forth motion, very like what happens with women's and men's groups when they act on each other ritually. So collective song and dance is the focal point of communal life. Things like initiations are collective events, and songs and dances are medicine for the whole community. They're maintaining or restoring well-being and balance. And Sawada in particular, describing hunter-gatherers dance sequences and their sensitivity to sound, brings out the fact that again, from, you know, the smallest moments to the biggest celebrations, it's very hard to pinpoint where one person ends and another begins. And he talks about this in the context of polyphony. Sometimes he says the interval was so little I wondered who sang first or who called first. and he believes that that high level of vocal kinesis is reflective of what's happening on a physical level. And again, this idea of the body as a complete instrument. Okay, so I suppose what I'm trying to say, and I have a lot of ideas about this, what I'm trying to really impress is the fact that the whole body operates as an instrument in cultures where touch is fundamental and has remained fundamental to the ways that we socialize and the ways that we connect. And we can only really imagine what it's like on a chemical level, on a sensuous level, to be held in this kind of, basket of auditory, kinetic, rhythmic, physical flow that Mbengele babies will grow up in. And what it's like to be personified in a world where all the major lines of being are being sung and danced. And the collective space kind of reverberates with the music of the body. And one of the reasons that that's so, and I've talked about this before, I really believe one of the reasons that the collective space at Mbula was so resonant, was so full of music and chatter and laughter, is that it has to be continually kept open. It has to be continually negotiated, because there's no guarantee that 5 minutes from now there won't be an opportunity for someone to grab or clutch or privatize or close things down. And so this is probably one of the most important qualities of the collective body, and one of the things that insists on is that things not be closed down, that things not be privatized, and that we not be broken apart into separate individuals who will then take care of ourselves and our own needs over and above everything and everyone around us. And there are implications of this way of being in the world, way of knowing yourself and others for the whole kind of ecosystem, the way that we engage with everything around us in the other than human community as well. And that's a point that David Graeber made again and again, that there's this constant reiteration of power. Even in situations where stratification, hierarchy, closure isn't a reality, you act constantly against it. You maintain the vigilance, and actually it becomes a source of feeling good, and a source of joy. And I mean, what I've been building here, I suppose, is an appeal for deepening our understanding of things like hunter-gatherer corporeal morality, and how that gets weighed against the long history of Western philosophical and epistemological silencing, that we're familiar with. And I think following the literature on hunter-gatherers, looking at episodes like those sick babies at the start, from the perspective of the collective self, means paying attention to all the other conversations being played out through dance, through song, that are flagging up the power of shared blood, of sexual solidarity, but also of the ability to transcend that using dance performance. And I've talked before about the fact that you have female procreative physiology and fluids being particularly kind of pushed out into the cultural space. It's like keeping the maternal body public. And by doing that, access to everything the maternal body offers is kept public. It's accessible to everyone. Nobody gets diminished by the loss of that. And And it's the same with, you know, the child element. The child element is very strong in Benjele or Baka or even in Juntois culture. You can feel that playful, you know, spontaneous kind of fusing something that kids bring when they're allowed to remain socially central. So I was thinking that the body in all my writing from the thesis on is really this body in motion, this body that's perennially moving and full of this kind of jouissance that Barthes would have understood. But that in trying to bring it into an academic framework, you know, wanting to be serious and be taken seriously, sometimes the reality gets distorted. And sometimes you leave behind the things that are actually most important. And I had wanted to mention as well Colin Turnbull and his interest in what's happening when Mbuti infants are melded into the social body is an action against the possibility of akami, so the possibility of intersexual conflict and particularly male aggression, that by weaving kids into this collective body early on, you work against that from the beginning. So performance of bodily power or counter power is always acting in response to the possibility of its opposite. And I want to close with Bakhteen's insight because I love Bakhteen's work. I think it's very pertinent to the literature. I think it deepens a lot of what I found on hunter-gatherers. His insight that medieval parodies and feasts performed this kind of alchemy on scholarly wisdom. He said, these moments bring scholarly wisdom back inside laughter to the positive material bodily sphere. Everything they touched was transformed into flesh and matter, and at the same time given a lighter tone. And that's a flip of the conventional process where flesh becomes word and abstraction. You know, the kind of the dominance of the word in so much of the history that we're familiar with. And here's my final epilogue. Do I have time, Chris, for a 5-minute epilogue?
Certainly do, absolutely, yes.
Okay. So I thought, I've been thinking about touch a lot, and I thought the human hand is made up of 27 individual bones, carpal bones, metacarpal bones, finger bones, all connected by joints and ligaments. So 1/4 of our body's bones are found in our hands. The radial nerve carries sensations from the skin on the back of the hand and thumb directly to the brain. And there are 17,000 touch receptors and free nerve endings in your palm. They pick up sensations of pressure, movement, heat, and vibration. And the skin on your fingertips is particularly sensitive to touch. So what happens when the main focus of your touch in any given day is a phone screen, a keyboard, a mouse, a Chromebook, a smartboard? And I want to use what I've said about touch to reflect on the fact that we are increasingly being herded deeper and deeper into this idea of virtual contact, virtual connection. And it's you know, it's really rife on social media and other powerful digital platforms. And yet as a society, we're getting lonelier. You know, what happens to all of that 17,000 nerve receptors that are supposed to be stroking, touching, you know, feeling, pressing, and this process kind of sweeping us off the streets and out of the marketplace and away now from each other's hearths Nobody's allowed to come in my house anymore and sit at my fire, out of each other's arms. It started a long time ago, but it seems to be reaching a critical point. And I'm not just talking here about the virus. You know, I know that there are extraordinary circumstances there, but I think our global dissociation from the rest of existence is happening because we forgot about touch. And we evolved because we touched. We evolved because we shared each other's babies, each other's blood, each other's fire, each other's meat. And then, you know, we came to share each other's dreams and imaginations and songs and stories. We learned shared mind. You know, it didn't just pop up out of nowhere. It happened because we touched and we risked touch. You know, I think about those women beside me at Mbula, Mgonya and Sape, one of them feeding the other's baby, you know, and those babies, every second of their lives in contact with another body. And the fact that when they got ill, everyone carried the illness. Yet we've arrived at the point where we have actually managed to convince ourselves that mind is the relevant bit, and that we can use these virtual pathways and instruments to continue to share our dreams and convey deep meaning, you know, to develop synchrony, to create relationship. And you hear that kind of rhetoric coming a lot out of Silicon Valley these days. You know, it's all about connection. Mm. So my question really is, why are we all so lonely? And watching The Social Dilemma, this documentary on Netflix at the moment with my teenager, recently I was really struck by someone saying, we're all lab rats now. He said, we're all users. And what I thought is, okay, but they are also using, this is what's ingenious, they're using our ancient evolutionary need to touch against us. They're using it to create a dependency on this pacifier, this kind of virtual dummy that we get in place of real touch, real holding, real heat, real, you know, real embodied joy. And our bodies have adapted over hundreds of thousands of years to expect to be touched. And babies are still born with that impulse every day because nobody told them that we're all brain now. They're born expecting to be rocked and stroked and licked and groomed, and later on, as they progress through the life cycle, to be oiled and painted and danced. You know, so the old brain, the body's expectations are the same, but it's as if the tech comes and steps in with this virtual hug, which turns out, if you look at a teenager at the mercy of it, as I often do, to be the kiss of death, really. The virtual hug is not the real hug. It's not a salve for that emptiness in the air around us. That, you know, that absent collective body that our brains and skins develop through. And I think a lot about the fact that the Benjeli aren't exceptional. You know, the Jintois aren't exceptional. We're exceptional. Technology is very clever and efficient and convenient. And I'm not denying it's a useful way to communicate. But what it is not is connection. It's not tenderness. It's not a hand on your shoulder. It's not arms around you when you feel desolate. It can't smell your hair. It can't pick up on your electricity or your pheromonal state. And if it ever does achieve that level of sophistication, it will probably be in order to manipulate you in some way, because it has arisen directly out of that military industrial capitalist complex. And so that's just a kind of I suppose, ending on an appeal to really begin to bring the insights that were being offered by people, you know, like Jerome and many others, long-term ethnographers who are, you know, from the Benjeli, bringing us these concepts and these practices and these techniques for how to touch in ways that are healthy and in ways that challenge the current kind of drive to move everything into an increasingly disembodied state. Yeah, okay, so I think that's, I'm not going to talk anymore. I'd like to hear what others have to say.
Well, Morna, you say that we can't touch each other through Zoom. I have a feeling that you, in some way, have touched all of us. I feel, I mean, obviously, yeah, it was so lonely, and it is so true what you said. But anyway, well done, fantastic. Not sure what to say. Just maybe, I mean, we're going through a real death now, of course. The whole, I mean, possibly it will be, it is possible, of course, that this death is, this COVID is the start of a wider death inflicted by, you know, the wretched social systems we've been involved with for so long. But there's always the possibility that if you sort of go through death fully, you come out the other side. And I'm just sort of hoping that, having been starved of touch so tragically and cruelly for so long, when we are back, whenever this happens, whenever this vaccine happens, or whenever somehow or other we get over this moment, maybe we'll be hugging and touching with even more joy and passion than ever before. We've been starved of it for so long. And just to say, I think 13 moons, 13 moments of dark moon for singing to the trees before something possibly amazing happens in Glasgow in November, which is the conference of the parties. This, what many people are thinking is the final chance we have as a species to sort out a far worse catastrophe than COVID, which is of course the irreversible, potentially passing the tipping point of climate change. So what just before you came on, Jerome was reminding us all of something which in Rag, partly inspired by a certain trickster, we started singing for our lives every dark moon, singing to the tree. Find a tree wherever you are, and let's get together and sing for our lives. Sing to the tree, with the tree, and let the tree sing in us as well, and somehow connect up in a way which makes sure that there is a tipping point in November in Glasgow, but it tips the right way, tips away from death into a new version of everything that you've been telling us about, and Jerome's been telling us about, a new version of, your word is the best one I can think of, it's communism in motion. Not static communism, not totalitarianism communism, not fixed communism, but a joyful communism which is happy to play with its antithesis so that everybody's happy. Anyway, over to everybody else. I don't know what, Jerome's got his hand up. Go on, Jerome, yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Morna, for that lovely, passionate and extremely insightful reflection. It made me think, you know, that one of the sort of enduring obsessions with this patriarchal military-industrial complex is convenience, comfort, ease, you know, time saving, and all these sorts of gadgets and inventions, from pavements to shoes to cars, houses, the insularity of our lives, living in rooms, really does seem to be at the heart of what we're talking about here. So I'm getting a lot of feedback. Is that me? Or?
Trouble is, if I mute everybody, it'll mute you as well, Jerome, but I'll do that. If you unmute yourself.
Everyone and let Jerome.
Okay, sorry. But just to, you know, that this sensuous engagement is more of an effort than this sort of detached engagement that we've all become used to. I mean, just clothes, for instance, you know, when you're with them, Benjeli, you go in the forest, one of the first things you do is you start taking off your clothes. And it, you know, running through the forest in your underpants is somewhat challenging to a Western body. But actually, once you acquire the taste for it, it's absolutely addictive because it's so sensuous. The forest leaves are whipping your arms, your flesh, your body as you pass through. The bugs that are biting you and harassing you, and the ones that are ignoring you and leaving you in peace, all become part of a really deep dialogue that you have with the space around you. And I certainly know that when I return to the forest, one of the things I love to do is to just lie down, flung on the floor, and just feel the forest floor holding me and hugging me in a way. And that sort of full-bodied engagement with our environment, I think, is also part of, you know, what you're talking about in terms of our alienation from all these other beings that we depend upon for life. And one of the things I noticed, for instance, when we went to sing to trees the other week or month, was that not many people actually took hold of the tree and felt it, touched it. You know, and we have this constant distancing that we do between ourselves and others. And it really does seem to me to be part of this deep problem that we're having of relating in a more profound way, not just to one another, but to the environment as a whole. And I think that you most beautifully expressed that. And it's something which really, I think, is so important when we get so obsessed with convenience and comfort and the ease with which we can do things, jumping in a car rather than walking or whatever it is. And those are deep habits to change. But you know, I think, you know, what your talk has really done is a major sort of encouragement to everyone here. You know, start touching. And not just other people, but everything around you. Start feeling it, start experiencing it with your shoes and socks off, with your bum against the floor. You know, really start feeling where you are in the world and connect into it. And it does produce beautiful results. Anyway, so thank you, Morna. It's really a comment, but a beautiful talk. Thank you.
Can I unmute for a wee minute?
Of course you can.
No, thanks, Jerome, because that it's so good to have that reflected back. You know, I sometimes I'm not sure, and everything you say is just spot on. You know, and that fact that when you touch something, you're in relationship with it. You know. There's like I do the same. I go down into the forest here, and I touch things. I touch trees. I touch the soil. I touch the leaves. Recently, I've actually been getting into the river, and probably scaring a lot of the locals because I want to touch the river, you know, bed with my bare toes and feel the cold water. And you start to realize, my God, how much of this tactile relationship with our world we've lost. And if you're right, if you look at the Benjela, if I think about the women I lived next door to, not just that they were touching and always in contact, but like you said, skin to skin. You know, you're really the level of sensitivity is at its highest there. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, you really feel someone on such a different level, or you know someone on such a different level if you're touching them while you're communicating with them. It's very interesting. And in fact, it's amplified if you're not so familiar with that person. If you're very familiar with the person, there's an ease to the touch which mitigates against attending to it with quite the same acuteness that you do if you don't know someone so well. And it's very interesting how you deepen that connection through the touch in very powerful ways.
Yes, yeah, it is.
I'm looking for any hands up. Can't see any. Am I missing anyone? Oh, Morna, you seem to have, I don't know, seem to cast a spell when everyone's unsure how to, it's like follow that. How do we follow that? It is hard. Well done, Jerome. Ingrid, why don't you say something?
All right then. This is so beautiful, Morna. I just love you. I just had a phone call actually this morning from the forest through one of our hunter-gatherer representatives, and my two best Benjele female friends said, "Ah, you're inside a house now and you can't get out." And they said, "We are together. We are here. We are together. And listen, we are hungry. I need a mosquito net. I need food and I need clothes. And I'm going to the market now. And you're going to send me some money to do that. And we don't get this disease that you have because we are together." And what you have just done for us is this removing ourselves from what really matters. What really matters. And really the first law of the universe is love for one another. And you have given that back in your talk. And I know how precarious it is as a mother, and trying to, you know, put it into academic terms so that you can share it with the world at large. And I can only say, Morna, well done and thank you for it.
Oh, thank you. That really means a lot, Ingrid. I mean, it means a lot because my understanding comes both from, you know, my physical sense of what happened when I was in the forest, and from yourself and Jerome, you know, everything that you have both shared with me in different ways. I mean, that's again, I know that comes from your putting into practice Benjele principle, you know, and understanding that you share good things. And I think it's, for me, the frustration, like yourself as a mum, is like, it's urgent that this stuff be shared now. It's urgent that it move out of academic frameworks, out of seminar rooms and library stacks, and that we start bringing the conversation into different you know, platforms, different ways to communicate. And actually, platform is a bad word. I don't like that word because it always makes me think I'm going to end up on another Zoom. But you know, discovering ways to touch that are relevant and accessible to us all, it seems to be the first step. When your body gets back in touch with the earth, when you come to your senses, that's where you actually are capable of loving or caring for or experiencing tenderness. And you know, the other thing that I thought of is that the other side of tenderness, the other side of that sensitivity to touch, is that it can be painful to touch others. And I think that's probably why so many of us have learned to withdraw, and are having to find our way back to being able to touch. Because, you know, tender is not just tenderness, it's like the tender spot, the part where it hurts because you feel someone else, or you share yourself with someone else, you touch them and they touch you, and it's like physical. And of course, this is why it's easy to, like Jerome says, to move us to pathways that are convenient and fast, where we can tell ourselves we're connecting, but we're not touching each other anymore.
This absolutely necessitates to decelerate time. We really have to. It's absolutely, it's the fundament of change, to decelerate time.
Yes. Yeah.
That will involve decolonizing time and getting rid of the ridiculous time is money clocks we're all enslaved to, and getting back to the clocks that we evolved with as a human species, and we are an Earth, Sun, Moon system, and patriarchy has just blotted out the moon, and everything is totally solarized. And so it is very urgent, Morna, but you're not allowed to think that you can just leave your PhD in the University of London, sort of some shelf somewhere. I'm really sorry, Morna. I know you can't touch through a written piece of work, but you're getting your stuff out is actually urgent. I'm really almost angry with you for having left it there instead of telling you to do a book, because I suppose I'm inviting everyone who's listening to you here. Can everyone here please urge Morna Finnegan to get on with getting her thesis, which is beautifully written. It's already absolutely readable. It's not like most dissertations. It interweaves the personal with the political, with the research stuff. So Morna's self-description of her experience there, and of course having a daughter as a result of being there, all of that is in that amazing book, which unfortunately hasn't been published. So I hope everyone's going to endorse my plea to you, Morna. It isn't an alternative to touch, it's an adjunct to it. The more people hear the Vangeli through your work, as well as, and of course, actually another person who's equally guilty, possibly more guilty, is Jerome.
I was just waiting for that.
His PhD still not published. It's a scandal. It's an absolute scandal, both of you. Get on with it, it's urgent.
I flag something up here, I'm sorry. I hear your plea, Chris. I will second that plea only if parenting, that next generation, books get shelved, reports, I mean, how many reports have we written? They gather dust somewhere. What really remains is these groups of people we inspire. So thank you for you, Chris and Camilla, for providing this platform, for sharing this with the next generation and the next and the next. And that's what we are doing as parents, to share it with the next generation. Yes, of course, also a book. But if it fits around parenting and that touch that Morna is really talking about.
One thing that possibly Morna could do is read her book, read her PhD, and just get a vocal recording out immediately, so that, because hearing a voice is a damn sight closer to touch than reading printed paragraphs. So that's another way of doing it, perhaps. Anyway, Camilla, were you going to say something?
Could I just come in a little? Morna's talk's been so poignant because it's putting us right against this terrible contradiction of the loss of touch, but also caring for each other because of not doing that. So I've been not touching people that are most close to me, and it's, that's kind of, you've got to do it. And then this whole question of touch on the keyboards and so on, and yet humans are super flexible and creative about ways of creating connections, even when we know there are rules. I mean, think of children's games like hopscotch or something, when what are the games when you can't go on the snakes and the snakes, so you'll die or whatever. But we obviously need to find ways that, even if we are going to get saved by this vaccine, that we've obviously got to find ways of creating the touches. Even on the chat, there's been some poignant discussion among people who find touch extremely challenging. Touch can be very challenging. And I know that too myself, that if you're in a certain emotional spectrum or neurodiverse spectrum, then touch is very hard to handle. So even though, yes, if we all grew up in Evangeli, that cradle of where everybody's holding those babies, then it would solve so many problems for us. But I just wanted to say, because Jerome did mention and Chris did mention about this whole idea of singing for our lives and the Lunarchy song. So most people here will realize that the new moon, the dark moon, is on Sunday evening. So it's absolutely sort of new moon. And the idea is very, very simple, that you just go yourself or with anybody that's close by you, So we've got to be local really at the moment, and find a beautiful tree and sing to the tree, or read poems to the tree, or express yourself to the tree, or touch the tree, or whatever it is. So you're connecting to the tree and the roots, and to the sky and the moon, and you're connecting across the landscape to everybody else that's doing that. And this next moon, if we take 13 moons ahead from this dark moon, the 13th will be the time of COP26, the Glasgow. It's supposed to be then actual real bodies meeting, I suppose, the climate conference, which is really the last gasp. It's really the last chance. There are not going to be many more chances. So can we make some kind of singing songlines network across the landscape, even if it's just from London to Glasgow, but what about across the Atlantic? And we heard this amazing talk from an Australian on Saturday, Tyson Juncker-Porter as well. We could connect up those song lines. It wouldn't be very difficult. It doesn't take, you know, a revolution requires collective bodies, sensory connected bodies. It doesn't need guns and insurrection and things like that. It just needs these collective bodies that Morna's been describing, the power of these bodies that get connected up with the trees and with the moon. I'll just put that in there. And anybody else?
So just on that same topic, I mean, yes, Tyson from Queensland, who's an Aboriginal teacher and philosopher and lecturer in Indigenous knowledge, absolutely astonishing. Sorry?
Wik-Mungan speaking.
From the Wik-Munkan, that's right. And in anthropology, we know a bit about the Wik-Munkan from classical social anthropology. David McKnight in particular was very influential on me. Anyway, he was just telling us about the songlines in a way which was much more than just describing his own local culture. He was describing the ways in which these lines of singing crisscrossing the landscape right across the entire continent of Australia, connecting up with one fabric of song and wisdom and ancestral power. I mean, it is a fabric of connectedness which should be and could be potentially woven across planet Earth. And I suppose we were inspired by Tyson's talk to us because and of course it's very close to what Jerome has already been helping Indigenous activists around the world to do, to make sure that those Indigenous voices and right across the world are heard. But let's try and do that specifically over this next 13 moons to try to get songlines crisscrossing the landscape. So one of the ideas would be, let's find paths across this particular country where some of us are. I know not everyone listening probably is in England, but or Scotland or Ireland, but find ways of moving across rivers and through trees and green spaces which are not roads as we sing, and find connections which are not transport connections, and possibly if there is an idea of some kind of general strike for just 2 weeks around the COP organization, and trade unions are thinking of this. As we walk along, we could possibly sort of encourage motorists not to drive on that day, and partly do that by singing along the particular roads that we happen to cross as we're following our own songlines. So there are lots of possible ideas. We need lots of input into all this, but it's there's quite a chance that we could make this event in Glasgow really significant and really a turning point. But only if Indigenous voices are heard. If it's just various NGOs and environmental groups with their mission statements and their
we're Indigenous. We're all Indigenous. We are Indigenous.
That's a fantastic angle. I'm extremely Indigenous to Catford and Forest Hill, part of London. Yes, I know. Any more? We've been given a link from Amber to a link called Slow Ways. That sounds perfect.
Yeah.
Let's have slow time, lunar key, and slow movement on foot and bicycles. And actually, by the way, again, there's been a huge uproar in London, especially where I am, because the local councils, influenced by Extinction Rebellion, have blocked a vast number of roads all over the place. It's almost impossible to move in a car around Lewisham or you know, or where I live in Forest Hill, and it's the idea is quite good actually. It's to get people used to walking and cycling and taking completely different routes, and so things are sort of moving quite quickly on these issues, and possibly with the collapse of that strange person in the White House who was apparently refusing to get out, possibly his collapse, which looks imminent, could again encourage a bit of a chain reaction of collapsing patriarchs. Anyway, there's always a hope. There's always a...
Always have to hope, that's right. I would just point out the slow ways. Daniel Raven Ellison is the man behind turning London into a national park city.
Ah,
and he succeeded.
fantastic.
Yeah, London is now the first national park city in the world. And there are a number of other cities around the world who want to also become national park cities. And once you sort of start counting the green spaces, the trees, the wildlife that exists in London, you suddenly realize that it represents, I can't remember the figures now, but it is in the thousands of hectares of green spaces, of natural habitats and so on. And people's gardens are really important spaces. And he's been working doggedly for the past sort of 10, 15 years now to organize this. And the slow way that you've just, someone shared, is exactly one of his efforts, and you know, I strongly encourage you, if you do live in London and you haven't already engaged with London National Park City, have a look. It's a really exciting organisation, and they really are doing all sorts of very lovely small things which altogether make a big difference to the quality of life here, and indeed a model for many other cities around the world, because we have to solve these problems. We have to start connecting to our space, our environment, even if it is one that we consider to be urban and built up.
Yeah.
And that is one of the advantages. I mean, not many, but COVID has actually made me discover all my rivers. I mean, I've walked from end to end of the Craggy, the Ravensbourne, I mean, there's a whole bunch of rivers around here, and you can walk miles and miles and miles following these amazing rivers, around which are amazing trees and greens and all sorts of interesting birds that fish in the river, and all. So there are, it's a shock and it's a horrible thing, but maybe it's the kind of shock we needed to make us, you know, discover different parts of the landscape. That, I mean, I'm ashamed I'd never walked along the Ravensbourne before, and it's my river. It's just, you know, I've lived alongside it for 30 years without even following it, knowing it. It's disgraceful.
That's why for this coming Sunday's no moon, we can still do exactly what we were told to do. We can meet outdoors with another person. Two people can stand by one tree, two other people can stand by another tree, two other people can stand by yet another tree, and we can still sing a polyphony together. Because that's what you do in the forest.
Exactly. Fantastic.
So I would encourage everyone to go out this coming no moon and stand with your friend, pal, partner, child, neighbor, whoever, and encourage the others to come out as well. Stand by another tree. You can have your 2 meters distance, and you're not a group of 25, but it would be great to have that many, and sing to trees.
Sing for our lives.
Sing for our lives is what it is.
That's what it is.
So is it more or less time to wind up? Any final thoughts, Morna? Or shall I just say?
Yeah, no, just it's always the collective kind of, you know, discussion and the way that you ideas circulate and build that I really love about these things. And having slated technology, I mean, without it, we wouldn't have been able to do this. So
thank you, Morna. That's a very good point.
But you know, I definitely I think that if you go back to all the stuff that's being done by the Benjele, you know, by the Juntois, using your voice to join together, co-presence. I mean, this is, like Ingrid says, that that's what we now have to be doing instead of talking about it. And you know, books have a place, you're right, Chris, but that we actually now, you know, bring it into our own way of being, and neighbours and friends and community.
Yeah, all the same, Morna, get your book out. Okay,
Yeah.
I've had the last word there.
Okay, I have my knuckles wrapped.
Okay, everybody. So thanks ever so much. When next week it is, is it Nurit?
Wait, it's Nurit, but David,
yes,
on peer-to-peer cosmos.
Yes,
from a work of the Nayaka in South India.
That's right. So I mean,
that would be very interesting.
We'll be very much talking about companion beings, spirit beings, as part of the real social world, you know, part of nature and culture. So it should be very, very interesting. So, and
he is engaging with this debate about egalitarianism or hierarchy, which we didn't talk today about Graeber and Solens so much, because I think Morna's work is a real challenge actually to the way that Solens and Graeber saw that there was always some form of sovereignty over people. But Nurit will probably engage with that.
That's right. Marshall Solens thinks that hunter-gatherers can't be egalitarian because they've got kings. The kings are their gods.
Sovereignty.
Sadly, wonderful in so many ways, David Graeber went along with that strange idea that hunter-gatherers have kings. Anyway, okay, so that's next week. So see you all then. Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.